Hey guys, I just want to show off a deck that I've been working on for a little while now. I won regionals with it on Sunday, which is not that big a deal. There's only 12 people. There's not that big a scene where I am, which is annoying. But trust me when I say that if there was a big event in Opus 5 format that I could attend, then I would have saved this deck for it. I would have taken this deck almost certainly and not revealed it before then, so to speak. I actually think it is really, really good. I feel super confident playing this deck in an event. But I want to try and go through the sort of like deck building perspective, like how I build the deck up, sort of go through like the pieces of the deck and how they come together. So it's a little bit of an experimental kind of deck profile format. So let me know what you think about it. But what I'm going to do is highlight the different pieces, starting with the core of the deck. Now, this is my motivation for building the deck. So when I want to build a deck, I look for something unfair. So something that gives you more than it costs, basically. So it's highly efficient or powerful. And in this case, we're looking at Dadaluma and Cactuar. This is by far the most unfair, degenerate interaction in the entire game. Being able to ping your own Dadaluma to turn your small pings, which are cheap, into large pings, which can kill opponents forwards. That's very big. Cactuar costs 0 CP to tap it and deal 1k. And then you ping your own Dadaluma, and that then deals 4k to one of your opponent's forwards. You're paying 0 CP to deal 4k. That's already really good value. But the worst part is that Cactuar is non-unique, so if you have 2 in play, you can deal 8k damage for 0 CP every single turn. That can one-shot a huge chunk of forwards in the game, to the point where your opponent can probably never develop a board again. The only forwards they can play at that point that don't immediately die are those with like some kind of protection or penalty for being targeted or dealt damage. Like, that's already ridiculous enough. But all of this is at instant speed, so not only can you get obscene value every turn, your opponent also can't really prepare for it or play around it, because whatever they do, you can just stack to it. And that's not to mention that Dadaluma also has his own protection ability anyway, so any way they try and interact with him or remove him or stop him, that's going to trigger him as well, so they're still going to lose out, they're still going to get punished. So basically it's a setup that leaves your opponent with no options, in an unfair board that they can't really do anything about. The most intuitive way to deal with it would be to remove the Cactuars, but currently there are so few ways to do that efficiently, to deal with monsters specifically, and the ones that do exist are quite inefficient, especially since the Cactuars only cost 1. But even at 1 Cactuar, you've still got that 4k for free whenever you want. It really lets you like make a lot of favorable trades, like trading up something like Setzer, for example, who, you know, he kind of enters, gets his ability, and then he's kind of like an expendable body, especially the fact that when he dies, he dulls and freezes something. Having him be able to trade up, like on blocks especially, also when he's attacking though, that's pretty big. When you've got extra little packets lying around from other things, like Wall, for example, he does the 3k to a dull forward. You can combine that with the 4k off a single Cactuar to deal, like, to kill something. So even when you're not at critical mass, is what I keep saying, for like 2 Cactuar and Dadaluma is kind of what you're aiming for. Even at just 1, you've still got a much stronger control over the board than you really deserve for the amount you're paying. So yeah, that's the core of the deck. Now, Wind and Earth, previously, this interaction existed in Opus 4, but at that time, Wind and Earth didn't really have anything else going for them. Like, there was almost no other synergy between the 2 elements, and they also didn't have that stronger cards by themselves. They often needed to support other elements who had their own strong cards. But now in Opus 5, we get Semilafina and Star Sibyl, which is another very unfair interaction. It's not as obvious, but Semilafina is a card that shouldn't exist. It basically, if you see that before you see Star Sibyl, you're probably going to win that game. It gives you way too much value. Semilafina is basically a 0 cost backup, or a 2 cost backup that says draw a card, because that's 1 card less that you're paying for the Star Sibyl later. And for some reason, Semilafina has an action ability which can ping Dadaluma as well, which doesn't require you to dull Semilafina either. And a lot of people forget about that when you're playing against them, that you might have that extra 4k ping off of Semilafina hanging around. People kind of overlook that quite a bit. But yeah, I don't understand why they made this card and why they also gave it that interaction with Dadaluma too, but here we are. Now, the next thing I do when I have something unfair that I want to base a deck around, I look for ways to do it reliably. So if I have something unfair I'm doing, I want my deck to do it as much as possible. So in this case, we do have searches for these cards, so I want to search for both halves of the combo, and we have Setzer and Gastalian Empire Sid, best search chain in the game, makes Ice really good even by itself, but the fact that this can search Dadaluma, we've got like 8 copies, 8 instances of the first copy of Dadaluma, I should say, so you will be seeing Dadaluma every single game quite easily. On top of that, Gestalian Empire Sid and Setzer can also search Umaro. This is a really cool thing. Like, was kind of my inspiration to build this tricolor deck in the first place. Umaro can be searched off Setzer and Gestalian Empire Sid, and he searches Cactuar. And he can be played for full value off of Star Sibyl's action ability. There are not many good enough 6 costs in the game for Star Sibyl, but this is one that fits really nicely. It's got a nice EX on top of that, which is cool. I would consider playing more than one, maybe just for extra EXs, but that's not really necessary. He just fits really nicely into the engine to give you the search for the other half and that full value body off of Star Sibyl. And then, of course, we have Cam Lenore and Chaos. This is the really ridiculous part about Star Sibyl, is that you can search a card that searches Rainbow Mana. And this is what has made tricolor or decks with like more than 2 colors in them way more viable. And we've seen quite a few decks with like, splashed cards like Urianger, Phoenix, like these like one-offs of this element that's completely not part of the deck. But you can do that because you can get to Chaos quite reliably. And Shantoda helps, of course, as well. So I'll go through that now. The next cards I look for, these kind of fill out the search aspect of the searches. So obviously Lock is the nuts with the 6 engine. You've got Gestalian searches Setzer searches Lock, and he gets the discard on entry, and then he's a constant threat once he's on the field. I think Lock is obscene value. He is probably my pick for the best legend in the game. That sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I actually think there is way too much value on this card. It should not be 7k. Its special is irrelevant. Like, even if you took a special away, it would still, in my opinion, be the best legendary in the game. So it just has that on top of everything else it does. So that's really nuts. Shantodo is obviously great to have with Star Sibyl. I don't know why we have a searcher for that, especially an EX searcher. It's really unfair that an aggro deck can be pushing you for damage and hit a Star Sibyl in your damage zone and suddenly you win the game. I think that's super silly, but here we are again. And usually you want one more dark card with your Cam Lenore in case, you draw Chaos first or something like that. My choice is the Emperor. I mean, people are going to think I'm being biased, and I don't know, maybe I am, but Emperor it does something that nothing else in the game can do. The amount of things that this turns off that nothing else can turn off is insane, and Cactuar Dadaluma is one of those things. That is probably what pushes me into playing the Emperor over any other dark card, is because it does turn off my opponent's Cactuars. The other option, though, if you don't want to particularly play Emperor, there's Kefka, who can search Cactuar, so that's always good. Ildnark, if you want that kind of recurring 6-cost 10k body that can bring out Star Sibyl, stuff like that, but I'm not a huge fan of that. It's cool, but I think the other 2 options are better. And then there's just the 1 Terra. It's kind of like a throwback to Ice Earth with the Terra pinging Dadaluma. That's still an option here. It's not really the high priority anymore because we've got Cactuar instead, but it is a nice thing to have with a Devout option as well, and sometimes that 4k on entry can actually help a lot. Like, if you only got 1 Cactuar with Dadaluma, that's an 8k. You can get out of that, or, when you got Wall, again, the 3k plus the 4k can make 7k. So it's just a kind of nice card to fill in. It's like, got the searchable Devout option, that kind of stuff. Now, next up, we need some more forwards. Obviously, we don't have quite enough yet. We need to fill out our forwards with some, like, solid forwards so that we can play on any board. The word that Josh Gee uses, which I really like, is a neutral forward. So that's a forward that you can basically play on any board, and it'll be like full value essentially. Like, you're not really losing anything playing it on like an empty board, or it doesn't have to be some kind of specific situation for it to be worth playing. So fortunately, in all 3 elements, we have a really solid neutral forward. They're all legendaries. We have Genesis, Ishtola, and Wall. Now, Genesis is nuts. We know this. We've seen him a lot since Opus 4 and Opus 3 even. He's very, very good pressure on your opponent. Basically, once you play Genesis, your opponent is now on the back foot. Just by playing that forward, your opponent, their options are restricted, because if they don't deal with the Genesis, if they don't stop that Genesis hitting them, they will just lose cards for nothing and probably lose the game. So it straight away pushes them into the reactive position, turns you into the aggressor, which just lets you have more options and restricts your opponent's options. Now, Wall, there is basically no board where you do not want this card on your board. It helps you push damage through really reliably, but also, especially in this deck with the ice forwards, Lock and Genesis, having a Wall to be able to push those up to 9k and push through to get the discard effect is really, really strong. That kind of free buff on those forwards makes them much more threatening. Being able to give Setzer Brave is also really good, because he's a solid blocker, and it just lets you put him in for free damage, because often, like I said, when you've got like a Cactuar and a Dadaluma, or you've got these things that can trade up with your Setzer, your opponent won't want to block it. but then if you got a Brave, they won't be able to attack into it either. So all effects are really, really good. Being able to turn your opponent's EXs off, that is a unique effect that we have only seen on one other card, and it's awful. Wall is what that effect should have been, and he does it really well. I'm really glad that we have a good card that can do that, because I actually hate EX as a mechanic. I hate the way it impacts games in ways that's a little bit unfair sometimes, but Wall lets you ignore that in a lot of situations, which is really, really nice. And Y'shtola, this is actually... she's almost lower priority here than in a lot of other decks, but she is a really nice forward to play on any board. But why I particularly like her in this deck is because with Devout and Star Sibyl, you've got two ways to bring in a forward at instant speed. If your opponent casts a summon during your turn and you have one of those cards up with an Y'shtola, you can like surprise cancel that summon. It may not be a surprise with Devout, but a lot of people don't think about that. Star Sibyl though is actually a surprise, and that's a really nice against things like Layak. When your opponent procs their Layak so they can cast their Phoenix during your turn, that's a 7 CP summon. If you go stack Star Sibyl, Y'shtola, cancel the Phoenix, you've taken away a lot of their CP and kind of stopped their play in a way they didn't expect. So that's why I particularly like Y'shtola in this deck, but she is also just a nice solid forward. Not taking damage from abilities is awesome, especially, again, she doesn't take damage from Dadaluma, which is really good, and also Our Cid, she's a forward you can just play on an empty board against Lightning and not have to worry about getting wrecked by Our Cid. And also, she creates a kind of soft lock with Emperor, which is cool. Emperor turns off all the action special abilities, and she can cancel any other ability. Shantoto is the main one, or most board clears. Cagnazzo is another. The fact that Y'shtola can cancel that, you can basically overextend. As long as Y'shtola's on your board, you don't have to worry about overextending because she can just cancel a board clear. So that's those forwards and why they're really good. Moving on to other cards that work well with the strategy. Now, summons wise, I only play 3 summons in this deck, and it's all 3 Hecaton Chair. It is by far and away the best summon in this deck. It really helps a lot having that one card or like thing you can do that your opponent doesn't see coming, because a lot of this deck is kind of stuff that you represent to your opponent. It's really strong because that doesn't matter that much. Like, even if you say to your opponent, I have this Dadaluma and these Cactuars, I'm going to ping all your guys to kill them. Just because they know that's coming doesn't actually help them against it. But it's some things, sometimes being telegraphed does actually help your opponent. So having that extra thing on top, that summon that you can have in your hand to really throw a spanner in your opponent's works without them knowing, is really nice, especially because it's such cheap removal, and it works really, really well with Wall. Being able to give your forward the 2k, so say a Dadaluma or, an Umaro or like Emperor even, Camlanaut, these forwards, you put them up to 10k, 11k, your Hecaton will probably just be like killing a forward, like 2-cost summon, break a forward. That's very good value. And of course, there is the interaction with Dadaluma. So when you use your Dadaluma with Hecaton, you also get the additional 4k ping, which again, you got one character on top of that. That's kill another forward. You got Terra, Wall, whatever. Just extra damage packets lying around for free means you can just get random kills on things that you don't really deserve for the amount that you're paying. Barbarisha obviously fits really nicely with your Cactuar, especially in this deck, even if the forward's got a buff. So normally when you Barbarisha something, it's been buffed, Cactuar might not be enough to kill it, but Cactuar and Dadaluma is. It's also this is the reason Gipple isn't in this deck, because Barbarisha actually has the same effect when used with Devout. So if you have an active Devout, I should talk about Devout now, before I explain this. Devout is probably one of the other reasons why I love Ice in this deck so much. It basically means you will always have Dadaluma in play. It is almost impossible for your opponent to keep you from having Dadaluma out. You've got these 3 copies, you've got 5 ways to search one of those copies, and then when they die, you've got these Devouts, which can just bring it back quite efficiently, like very efficiently even. So it's very difficult for your opponent to play without you having a Dadaluma in play. And then, of course, you've got all these other awesome options with your Devout. The Terra, like I said before, you've got Genesis for the Dull and Freeze, which is really good against reactivation as well. You've got the Y'shtola to cancel summons. But, the Shantoto Devout is still here. So this is one of the awesome plays about Ice Earth that I always talk about, is that if you have your 4 backups with a Devout, you play your Shantoto on that board, and you can crack the Devout, you pay 8 mana to get a 4 CP forward out, and also wipe the board. It's a very big swing. It really lets you become the aggressor even after you Shantoto, which is not normally possible. Again, in this deck, we also have Star Sibyl with that. I should mention that. You've got these 2 different ways to kind of be the aggressor and push after you play Shantoto. But yeah, Barbarisha with your Devout. in your turn, you're attacking, they basically can't block you if you have Devout up with a Barbarisha in your grave, because obviously if they block, you just Devout, bring up Barbarisha, and put that forward to 1k power, and then it will lose the battle. So that's the reason it's in here over Gipple is because it is also proactive removal. So normally Gipple is only useful with Devout, whereas Barbarisha is a proactive removal card as well with the Cactuars and the other things. And of course, that really helps with Lock and Genesis. These forwards that your opponent basically has to block or they will lose cards for nothing, they no longer can be blocked because you will just bring in a Barbarisha, make them 1k, you get a forward out, they lose their forward. It's basically lose-lose for your opponent. There's not much they can do about that. So that's a really, really strong interaction between Ice and Wind, which you can harness in this deck. But moving on, filling out the rest of the backup slots. Now, we have two concerns filling out our backups in this deck. One is a concern for any deck, is that we need enough turn 1 backups. And the second concern, specifically for this deck, is because we're in a multicolor deck, tricolor deck even, we want a really balanced backup lineup so that we can reliably get to the CP we need to be able to play the cards we need early if we don't see Chaos straight away. Because of course, we can get to Chaos fairly reliably, but there will definitely be turns and games where we're not playing with Chaos for a while. So we still want to be able to play cards efficiently and play cards the way we want to. Miner helps a lot with this kind of CP manipulation because you can pay that as long as you pay with any Earth CP. You can get back backup of the correct CP that you want to pay for the next card you play. So especially when you're playing 2 backups, getting the multicolor backups out early, Miner helps a lot with that. For the other one, we have Archer. Now Archer in this deck is my obvious choice for another Wind backup because Minwu is one of the very few cards in the game that actually lets your opponent play under Dadaluma Cactuar. Obviously, there are quite a few forwards that are protected from it, and they themselves will not be able to be removed by Dadaluma, but Minwu actually lets your opponent play their entire deck without worrying about Dadaluma. So it's nice to have a way to get rid of that when we want to, and even if it's not that efficient, it is efficient enough that the value we get off Dadaluma after that will catch up and then get us ahead again. So the other option we had in this deck is Hecaton Chair. That's cool, I guess. I don't really like that summon that much. But yeah, in my head, it's a no-brainer to just play Archer because that fills up not only the mineral removal, but also the 2-cost backup slots that kind of covers 2 things in one card, so we don't have to take up extra deck space. I also want to mention about Miner. It's a really solid, like, late game, grind game sort of card. I don't really like that term because it gets thrown around a lot, but you know, later on in the game, you got the whole toolbox of all the forwards in your deck when you need them, and that's especially awesome with Star Sybil. So if you've got a Star Sybil and a Miner up, that basically means it's almost like having your Devout with all your forwards that have their effects in the break zone when you bring out Devout at instant speed. You've now got that for any forward in your deck. Doesn't have to be 4 or less cost. It's just more ways to manipulate your combat phase. In ways that your opponent means they can't really block efficiently, they can't really do your battle phase the way they want to because you've got all these options to manipulate that at instant speed off your backups. So I just thought I'd mention that. Now Death Gaze, that is literally just in here as searchable Wind CP off Setzer. Now that is definitely the 50th card. I'm probably going to drop it. I was always on the fence about it, but I'd left in just to be safe in case I needed that Wind card off of Setzer so I could play the Semilafina to play into the Star Sybil or whatever. But yeah, I've never played it to the field. It's kind of cute, I guess. If you got that and Gestalion, you can play a lock on an empty board and still get the discard, but you're almost always going to have another 6 forward out anyway, so you don't really need to do that here. So yeah. That's just that card. And I should also mention Devout I do count as a turn 1 backup because, I mean, it's even cost, so you're playing it for full value. And also, it's probably the best time to play Devout because that is the turn that you're least likely to get punished for spending more CP on a backup rather than developing your board. So this leaves us with 12 turn 1 backups, which is a really nice number. That's the number I usually aim for. I will go as low as 10 if I have to, but we don't here, which is great. So I'm really happy with that. It's got a really nice balance between the elements as well. If you look, it says 5, 8, 6, 1. Obviously, Chateau doesn't really count for that, so it's more like 5, 6, 6, 1, which is a nice, thirds. 3 colors, evenly spread. That works really nicely. And I've found this deck since I pushed it more into Wind and Earth. Originally, I had it quite heavy Ice, and I was having trouble generating the correct CP that I wanted. Since I've moved it more into this nice balanced way of doing it, I've actually not really had issues. Maybe once or twice I've had a turn 1 that's been a little bit awkward because of the colors that I have, but most of the time this is actually pretty reliable at getting out the multicolored backups early enough, even for those games that you don't see Chaos straight away. Now, lastly, this is the card that I'm most excited to talk about. That's Barts. Now, okay, originally, when I built this deck, I had one slot left, and I chucked in Barts as like an afterthought, basically. I was like, I'll just chuck him in, see how he goes. It's a decent forward, could be cool. You know, I've got like ways to generate forwards, quite good. Turned out, Barts was actually insane. It's actually nuts. I immediately was like, I want to play more than one of this, for sure. Why? It's hard to kind of gauge why it's so good straight away. The easiest point to explain is that when you've got Devout and Star Sibyl, which can put in a forward for 1 CP, in that turn, obviously, you've paid more earlier, but you're kind of deferring that CP. You're basically playing CP's worth of forwards without actually putting them on the board, so your opponent can't get to them. And then when you play the Barts, you can actually push out forwards really easily to push that Barts up to 9k in one turn. That threat is actually quite big. Even without that, though, even just with 3 forwards out, Barts being a 3-cost 6k haste first strike, that's actually really, really good in this deck. It fills a really nice hole that I didn't realize the deck had. Having a haste forward especially, so normally, again, with decks like this, you've got the kind of telegraphed stuff, you know, they can't really do anything to surprise you, bring out things out of nowhere that you have to worry about, but a haste forward, that is something that Ice, Wind, and Earth do not normally have, so that can really bring out a damage out of nowhere that your opponent does not expect for you to have, even if it's not at 5 jobs, even just at 3 jobs. That extra point of damage that can come out of nowhere is a pretty big deal, and makes your opponent have to play a lot more carefully, but also the first strike actually works excellently because of Dadaluma and Cactuar. Again, I mean, that's the idea of the deck, but when you've only got 1 Cactuar and a Dadaluma, that 4k ping on top of a 6k first strike means your Barts is basically 10k. And when you can make that brave with Wall, he can be an attacker and a blocker, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's really, really good. Not only does Devout and Star Sibyl let you turn him onto 5 jobs easily and efficiently, it also lets you put him back to 5 jobs if your opponent has, you know, the kind of tricks to get around him. So often the way around Barts is to, you know, your opponent has their 5 forwards with the Barts, they attack with the Barts, you block and then use some kind of removal on one of their other forwards. Now Barts gets weaker and dies as well. But when you've got a Devout and a Sibyl backing him up, if you don't have to use them to get him to that point in the first place, they do their removal to put you down to 4. You can go straight back up to 5. And on top of that, Star Sibyl and Devout can also both get Barts out themselves. So you've got a Bart sitting in your break zone. Now your Devout that you have there is an extra damage whenever you need it if you're pushing for game. And again, you've got the Barts in your hand. Your opponent can't even see that. You can pull out two attacks on a Bart in the battle phase that your opponent didn't see coming. It's just so much threat and does so much more than I thought it would when I originally chucked it in as like an afterthought. One more thing I should say. Barts really helps push through those forwards I mentioned before that Dadaluma can't deal with. Forwards with like protection abilities from being targeted or from taking ability damage. Stuff like Canny Senna or big water forwards under Minwoo. Things like that. Those forwards that Dadaluma actually can't get to. Barts often goes over those. So it gives you a way to push through those boards if they get a bit stalemated sometimes. I don't know, like, you kind of have to play it. If you don't believe me, I urge you to try it out and see what I mean. Because again, I wasn't that confident in it at first, and I know a lot of people that I've shown the deck to beforehand have said like, oh yeah, I'll probably take out Barts and chuck in something else, you know. But I urge you to at least try it and see what I mean. Anyway, I've rambled on enough about that. I should also talk about some of the cards, some of the options and cards that are missing, and options for cards that you could play as well. First, I'll say the cards that you could drop in this deck, in my opinion. I mean, most of it, I'm really happy with a lot of the cards in here. Like, say, probably about 46 of the cards in here I think are optimal in my head. Obviously, you know, no one's perfect. No deck is perfect. There are probably things here or there that I could change. But the cards that I would consider dropping, Death Gaze, I've already said that. I'd probably almost certainly drop that as the 50th card. The second copy of Barbarisha is not that important. It's nice just to see it more often, but you'd think it'd be higher value in this deck than it is, but because you've got such reliable removal of the damage of Cactuar Dadaluma anyway, you don't really need Barbarisha like you would normally in like a Wind Cactuar deck. So she could go to 1, that's okay. Terra is not that important. Again, she's kind of like a throwback to Ice Earth, just cool to have, but I don't use her very often, honestly. So she's a card that you can kind of flexible play something else in that slot if you feel like it. And actually the second Ishtola as well. Again, I would never drop either Ishtola or Barbarisha to 0 because you want those options for Devout. That really gives you a lot of extra cool things to do. But you could actually drop Ishtola to 1. I do find myself not playing her onto the board as much as I thought I would originally. So yeah, those are the cards I would consider dropping. You might be wondering, where is this card? These cards even. So this is a very common thing to have in your sort of Wind Earth multicolor rainbowy decks, is the Urianger, Layak, Phoenix, that kind of stuff. Especially, Urianger is a really cool card, very high value. I think Urianger is actually one of the most unfair cards in the game. Again, it's a really, really high value forward for no reason. Like, it gives you so much value out of nowhere. But the main thing here is Urianger and Phoenix specifically. I can't afford a fourth color, honestly. Like, even if it's just like a 1 or 2 of. We're on a very fine balance between the 3 elements. Adding the extra element on top of that is it's probably pushing it a little bit too far. That means you will actually have really awkward hands where you just can't do what you want to do. Layak, though, is actually by itself, like just Layak in this deck without the Uri and the Phoenix, is probably still pretty good. It does, I mean, you're already going to be blocking really well with Dadaluma and Cactuar anyway, but it will give you more pings of that, more like, lets you attack more liberally, I guess, if you don't have the wall for Brave. So Layak is actually okay. I've got that covered on the next slide. These are the cards I would say probably next priorities if you wanted to try out some different cards in the deck. So I'll just talk about Layak. Diablos is a very, very good summon. The reason it's not in here is because if I'm already at like the amount of backups I would need to play Diablos efficiently, I've probably won anyway. I don't think this deck can really lose in a situation where you're like late enough in the game that Diablos is gonna give you the high value that it does. But it is a very, very good summon, and there are some forwards that Dadaluma can't deal with effectively that Diablos will deal with. Zide is an example that actually came up in a friendly. But anyway, Maria is a great backup for, multi-color deck, being able to give all your forwards the buff. That's nice to have when you don't have the mono element buffs in there. But the reason it's not in here is because it's another expensive backup. I'm already investing in Setzer, I'm investing in Sar Sybil, Cam Lenort, Shantodo, Devout. There's actually quite a few higher cost cards in here that you're dropping cards out of your hand into, and Maria might be one too many, but anyway, Zidane is a really, really cool forward. He would probably be a straight swap for a Barbarusha, I reckon. I'd probably do that. I'd try it out for sure. Just drop 1 Barbarusha for 1 Zidane. Great, cool little option, especially if you're getting out the 5th job for Barts. Zidane's a really good one to get out because it lets you see your opponent's hand and see if they have the answer to your Barts, and then you can plan your attack phase accordingly. Zalira, this is specifically for water. This is the next summon I would consider playing. I don't think that any other summons are necessary in this deck, really, but Zalira is the one I would consider for sure. Specifically, if you if you expect to see a lot of water, because all of their good forwards are 2, 3, and 5, and Minwoo is a threat to you, like I talked about before. So Zalira will actually let you punish water players for having their boards of forwards that you can't get rid of with Dadaluma because they're sitting behind the Minwoo, because they really do not have good 4-cost forwards. So that's always nice to have against that element in particular. Vayne, another forward that's very good in Ice, usually is like a one-of for the Devout option. I haven't found I needed it really in this deck, but is definitely an option. Over the Terror would be an easy swap if you wanted the Vayne, which I might try as well. It's just a really strong card when your opponent is playing 5 costs. Sidwath I talked about before. Did I? I don't think I did. But anyway, that's a really good option for a 2-cost backup, as an Ice backup. I should talk about Cactuar. Obviously, it's a very, very high value card, and you never want to discard Cactuar. You obviously want to be playing all of your Cactuars onto the field. But sometimes the Cactuar will be that only wind card you have to play the wind card you want to play. The only time I would consider ditching the Cactuar for CP is if it's the only wind card I have to play Semi-Lafina before I play Star Sybil, because the value you get off of that is enough to outweigh the drawback of having to discard a Cactuar earlier. And also in that situation, because you got the extra value off the Star Sybil, you'll probably be able to play an Umaru, get another Cactuar anyway. So that is the one situation where I would consider discarding Cactuar. Sidwath is a card you can play, so you don't have to be as worried about that. And also, if your opponent, if you start seeing ways to remove monsters, which are not common, but if for some reason your Cactuars start dying, then Sidwath is definitely a card you could want to be able to get them back. Because again, we don't have Urianger either. So yeah, that's a great option. I haven't found that I needed it, but it is a nice fallback if you do want that. And then we have Psycho Enforcer. This is an Earth card that can remove opposing Cactuars. That is why I've listed it here. Again, the biggest threat to Dadaluma Cactuar is Dadaluma himself. So basically the only deck that I feel like I can lose to with this deck is either a deck with Minwu in it, or a deck that is doing the same thing, the same unfair thing. The great thing about this deck, though, is that we tend to do our unfair thing more often than our opponent. Again, because we have the searches, all of the searches, as well as the combo in there, but also Devout. Now, often what happens when there's Dadaluma on both sides of the board, usually that just ends up wiping the board, because that is so many pinks going around that usually just everything dies. You having Devout to get your Dadaluma back out straight away and have more copies of it that you can get out efficiently means that you're going to have Dadaluma more than your opponent, and you can actually take those board wipes and re-establish your board faster and more often than your opponent. So that's one of the main reasons I like Ice in this deck, is because in the Dadaluma mirror match, so to speak, you actually have a lot of tools to help you come out on top. The other thing is, those kind of decks very often are slow starters. They usually take a little bit of time to set up. Obviously, you want to have time to get your cactuars out, maybe get your backups up so your lags are actually good, all those kind of things. You've got cards that punish people for being a slow starter. You've got Lock and Genesis, these forwards that if they don't deal with those early, they're going to lose too many cards and not actually be able to get set up in the first place. So it's really nice having these potential early threats in your deck to kind of push out the other slow decks if you need to do that. Like Water, again, slow starting deck, needs to set up its backups first and try and get a lot of water characters out so Kegnazo can be powerful, and get its kind of bigger forwards with Waka and Knight and all those kind of things. So forcing them to develop their front row early instead of their back row to put things in front of your Lock and Genesis means that they have trouble getting up enough backups to do the things they want to do. And again, because that's one of the main threats to this deck is Minwu, and then the other one is other Dadaluma decks. Having a good matchup in both those scenarios, in my opinion, really pushes it over the edge and makes it like a really good choice. And I think anyone who underestimates the power of the Ice forwards is making a mistake. Lock especially, it's one of those cards that, you know, it essentially costs you 1 to play because they have to discard when it enters. So it's basically a 1 cost 7k, and then they have to remove it to stop it pressuring them and discarding from them. But then you can just play another one and you've probably gained value out of their removal because they're probably spending more than it cost you to play it in the first place. So the Ice forwards themselves are actually really solid and really good early forwards that don't require any real setup to get the pressure on. And then, of course, you've got your mid-game, later game, Dadaluma, Cactuar, pinging, your setup that is just so hard for so many decks to break. So I think this deck covers most aspects of the game, has tools for every matchup, so there's almost no matchup and no situation that you can't play out of in some way, if not just completely roll over because of how ridiculous Dadaluma and Cactuar is. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone who talks to me about decks and wants to talk about ideas, especially Josh Gee. He's always happy to like bounce ideas off of brew decks with, talk about the latest deck, talk about how to beat that deck or how to make a better deck, talk about spicy ideas and stuff. So he's been really good with that kind of competitive discussion that I love. Thanks Ryan Stalarski as well for that, and for testing on like Octagon. We always have fun like bantery games. Thanks to the other Australian guys, they know who they are. Sam Riley too, he's always great to talk to and he's always really supportive, which is awesome. And a lot of other people that I've talked to as well. Like, I really like having people that want to talk about the game and want to talk about decks and things like that. Thanks Kageyama for always answering all my rulings on Twitter. I've said that before. Yeah, cheers for watching. If you want to try it out, I hope you have fun. I hope it works out well for you. Cheers.